Welcome, a listener, to another episode of Spam Humbug. This is episode 138.5 of the podcast. That's right, we are continuing the discussion that began a couple of weeks ago. And it was probably inevitable we were going to have an episode like this, but so be it. This episode focuses largely on the coronavirus and some of the impacts that it has had, right? We talk a little bit about, it starts actually with a discussion about like the creation of art assets. And then I mentioned Mo Willems, children's author who at the time was doing a program he called Lunch Doodles. He's the artist in residence for the Kennedy Center. And at the time that we recorded this episode, he was doing daily episodes where basically, we just show kids how to do art in different ways. Animated, non-animated, whatever. I don't think he's doing it now. It's been a few weeks since he's last posted an episode to that series, but it was a nice thing for him to do kind of during the initial stages of the lockdown as it happened in much of North America. Helped alleviate some of the pressure on parents who, of course, were struggling to, and are still struggling in some respects, to figure out the new normal. But moving on from there, we do talk about COVID-19 and its origin in China and some of the disinformation that surrounded it since the initial outbreak in the Wuhan area. At the time this episode was recorded, I think the U.S. had just become the country with the highest number of recorded COVID cases, surpassing even China's numbers. But of course, we touch on in the discussion as to whether those numbers are even reliable, whether you can even trust them. And we put some doubt on Russia's numbers as well, which at least as of when we recorded this, were really oddly low. And we talk about the economic impact of the extended shutdowns, the prospect of as many as half of all small businesses in Edmonton expecting that they will end up closing permanently as a result of an extended period of lockdown. But we do move on to some happier topics kind of around the middle of the episode. We talk about, some of the different ways that children especially are reaching out to communicate with each other and make the best of their inability to see each other in person. So things like Facebook's Messenger Kids, which takes a really interesting attitude towards privacy and data collection, actually, in that it doesn't really require you to enter accurate data for your children at all. Very privacy conscious for a Facebook app, I suppose. We talk about Google Classroom and online learning and my scout group's transition to online scouting and some of the challenges with, holding virtual meetings via Zoom. We talk about the challenge for some of working from home. It's not really a big issue for me, but there are some people who are definitely feeling some crunch from it. But we do eventually kind of get back onto the topic of the virus and the risk factors for the disease and some of the peculiarities of its lethality in certain age cohorts. Talk about some of the different measures that have been enacted in different areas to combat its spread. And then towards the end of the episode, things get a little bit religious. There's really no other way to put it, because myself and Golem Dragon kind of start talking about, the shift away from having church services in person. And, now we're consuming our spiritual food online as well, which, it's introduces its own difficulties and struggles. And I wind up diving down a bit of a rabbit hole, in some of the intricacies of Catholicism and how it celebrates the Mass and some of the different liturgical rites that you can find around the world and some of the syncretism and accommodationism that you can find in those different rites. And it ends on a very spiritual note. But you know what? That's fine. That is one of the 8 virtues too, isn't it? Anyways, we are, of course, hosted on Anchor.fm, newer, more social podcast hosting platform. You can find us at Anchor.fm/SSSH podcast or at spamhumbug.com. And if you do the smart home thing, the smart assistant thing, you can find us on Google Home or the Apple HomePod. Just say, hey, voice assistant, play the podcast, spam humbug. And of course, as always, this episode of the podcast is brought to you by our Patreon backers, patreon.com/ultimacodex, if you'd like to join that number. And that reminds me, I have a little note of thanks to add. And I apologize in advance because I'm going to completely butcher this name. Italian names always seem to trip me up, but a big thank you to Stefano Singialotto, or Singialotto. I'm not sure. I apologize, man. Sorry. You may recall that he came up in the news on the Ultima Codex a couple of weeks ago as well, or maybe within the last week. He's developing a RPG for the Sega Master System called Ellenica, which has some of its roots in Ultima, but he chipped in on Patreon. So thank you, Stefano, for your support. And again, patreon.com/ultimacodex if you would like to join our backers. And as always, a hearty thank you to our co-producers, Seth, Golden Flame, Chris, Dominic, Violation, Cranberry, Christopher, Bruce, Dark Wraith Dragon, Helgriff, Gronk, Pascal, and Thorwan. Okay, enough for me. Let's finish the show.
What else is new in the wonderful world of you?
I've been revisiting some things, mostly reviewing, checking on 3D models and importing them into Unreal Engine 4. Just seeing.
Now's a good time to be doing that with everything, with all of us spending more time at home.
Yeah, and trying to learn some new stuff. Checking and revisiting a lot of subjects on 3D modeling. I'm thinking of give it another try at 3D character modeling for the clothes, and I have the characters, the base characters. I'm going to do some sculpting for clothes and stuff and see how it goes.
Nice.
Yeah, and also do some test animations and also shading different materials. Try to get some good looking toon shading.
I'm trying to recreate some old graphics from the 90s.
Oh, pixel art? Or
Yep.
Nice.
Some old 2D pixelish that tries to look semi-realistic, at least in some ways, where at least you can very easily tell.
Mm-hmm.
But it's rather difficult to try to get it to match what some of the old ones used to look like.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like the assets aren't even being used anymore. So it's just kind of like, you know what? Let's try to recreate it, update them a little bit, repurpose them for something, and it's like, oh, it's so much time.
Yeah, especially if you're rusty on it.
Oh yeah, I haven't done any of that style stuff in good long.
Yeah. Yay. And also from what I've been working on, I have watched a lot of tutorials, but most of them use tools that cost a lot of money. Not by the well, not each of them, but all of them together. For example, ZBrush, I think it's usually $50 a month. They're right now it's on discount at $35 a month. And there's the Autodesk Maya, which also uses a monthly subscription, and all of them together. And also there's another, I think it's called Marvelous Creator. It's also subscription based. So a lot of the best modeling tools, a lot of the modeling tools the tutorials all are made for, they cost a lot of money. All of
Talking
them
about 3D
together.
modeling?
Yeah.
I have a friend who does professional work that she doesn't want me talking about, but I know about. She says she uses a program called Blender.
Yeah, that's what I'm using. But I was saying that I have been looking for tutorials on the workflow from coming from your first polygon to the whole character and importing it into a game engine, on how to do all of that. And most of them are tutorials and courses for ZBrush, Maya, Marvelous Creator, and other tools, all of them together.
Programs you got to pay for, basically.
Yeah.
I hear ya.
And so I've been mostly trying to open my my own way of my own to build my own my own trail. And right now I'm going to start working on sculpting to learn a little more about sculpting for creating the clothes. I already have an engine for creating the human body, with all the materials for the skin and everything, and a lot of parameters for the style of the character. If you want it to be realistic, if you want it to be anime style, it has also it has a lot of parameters that if you fiddle with them, and you get a character the way you want it. And then after you have it, it's just a sort of a mannequin, blank mannequin, and then you have to add hair and clothes. So that's what needs to be made, the hair and the clothes.
And this would be why making 3D models is such busy work.
Yeah.
To say nothing of why paper
But-
dolling is a pain in the ass in 3D.
Ugh.
Yeah.
I don't even want to
And
think about that. Anyway, we had one artist and programmer attempt to do that in one mobile game, and we just never got that one off the ground years ago.
yeah.
Like, it's a
right
nice
now
feature, and
there's
we're all royally
already
spoiled,
a
but
pipeline.
Yeah, we ended up getting hung up on that and a couple other things, and it's like, yep, mistakes were made.
Meanwhile, I have a problem drawing a straight line. So
Mhm.
hearing and much less watching people create art is something that I sit in awe of.
hey, you know what you might enjoy? I don't know if you're familiar with Mo Willems. He's a children's author, but I mean, he's got my kids love his books. And granted, like, I mean, his books are for kids, but they're not childish. Like, we've encouraged he my kids really like his he has a series called Gerald and Piggy. Gerald is an elephant, Piggy is a pig, and they're best friends. And they just have all these silly books together. Some of them are actually really quite neat in terms of like how he structured them, including one that is actually set up to be an infinite loop. It's really quite amusing. But his art style is like super, super simplistic. His stories are like they're not childish, and I've even encouraged a few people to like if you need an idea for like a skit at a scouting campfire event, and you don't just want to use the same skits we've all been using for the last 50 years, pick up a Gerald and Piggy book. It's short. You'll easily be able to adapt it to a 2 or 3 person skit, and it'll be funny as heck. And I've seen a couple of people do this now, and it's funny as heck. Anyways, very simplistic art style, just very basic line art. But in this era of everybody staying the hell away from everybody, I guess he's the artist in residence at the Kennedy Center, and he's been doing a daily YouTube series on weekdays. So, and I mean, like, he's definitely, he's doing it for kids, but like, if you want some very simple, like, drawing tips, it's worth, maybe 20 minutes of your time. Because he just does, very simple line art type characters and talks about a few other things too, fun activities that he tries to put out there. But, you know, sometimes not being able to draw a straight line is not actually a detriment to creating simple art.
I'm actually familiar with some of Mo Willems' work. There used to be a cartoon I followed largely because it was on at the time where I wasn't working. It was something he did for Cartoon Network called Sheep in the Big City. And if that's indicative of his art style, I understand what you're saying about very simplistic. It's not bad. It's just, you're right.
Yeah. Sorry, I just had to actually pause and look that up for a second. But yeah, no, that's in his that is his art style right there again. Um, and even some of the like he's done some other books that are much more. There's a lot more going on in the pictures than in a typical Gerald and Piggy book because in the Gerald and Piggy books, it's basically just the two characters against a flat background, right? So he's done other books where there's more going on, but the art is never particularly complex, but it really, really works. In a way, it almost just kind of gets out of the way. And, then you can just kind of read the story and there's something funny visually happening, but it's not like, it's not just like, oh my gosh, we will just bombard you with color and not really have much of a story to tell. Not that, um, so many other storybooks that have come and gone through the house here via the library have followed that particular methodology. No, never. But anyways, so yeah, if you want some basic tips, check him out. He's doing them for free for the time being, because what else are we all doing?
Yeah, it's pretty
Fair
much
enough.
almost like we're all kind of stuck in a rut at the moment. It's starting to honestly wear on some people, I've noticed. In some
I
ways, my frustration with going to the office is also kind of a nice thing, going to the office to just get me out of the house every day from Monday through Friday.
I've seen it so much too.
Well, I mean, like I was posting in the Ultimate Dragons channel, like I am so glad that one of the first things we bought after we moved into the house, and I mean, we moved in summer, so this was a very natural purchase for the time, was we just found a backyard playset, and it's got, sort of the raised up house area, and there's a slide coming down from that, and then there's a big beam that goes off to one side, and there's 3 swings that hang from that. And I'm so glad we bought it, because it's literally the only playground my kids have right now and are likely to have for several months.
I'm glad that somebody else sees that this is probably going to be a several month thing rather than over and done in 30 days.
Well, I mean, even if even if I optimistically assume that things are going to go here as well as they did in China, I should really put a laugh track in, but here we go. But I mean, like, depending on depending on exactly which set of figures you choose to believe, at the shortest, they were kind of in the thick of it from December until March. December, January, February, March. I count 4 months. So Alberta went on lockdown in March. So March, April, May, June. And it was kind of more the end of March, so I'm going to count July in there. So, we're already well into summer, even assuming a fairly short and optimistic timeline based on the experience of the country that this all started in. Um, yeah, I would like to think, I constantly find myself hoping that this is not going to be that long of a thing. And that is something that I see cropping up again and again in correspondence. Scouts Canada initially postponed all activities until April 6th. They've since extended activity postponement has now been extended to an indefinite duration, but facility closures have only been extended until May. And I'm seeing that crop up in other places too. I get kind of periodic updates. Okay, well, now our new, like, we're going to be closed until this time, or we're going to be closed until this time. And so, I mean, I certainly don't fault people for having that optimism or that hope that this will go away a lot sooner than it seems that it will. I have that same hope. I'm not necessarily optimistic about it, but I have that same hope. But so, I'm not surprised that in other places of the world, even other governments are talking about this as though it's going to be a shorter term thing than it is likely to be. But at the same time, at kind of the best case scenario, just based on what I've seen from other countries, is we're looking at a good 4 months of this, which, if the last week has been indicative of anything, is going to be a really, really interesting 4 months at my house.
Well, not to get out the tinfoil hat, but I think China are suppressing the numbers coming out.
Oh, yeah, you can't trust those numbers at all.
No, and that's all I'll really say at the risk of getting political, because we have people everywhere on the spectrum here.
We already got the podcast banned in China. It's fine.
We did? No kidding.
Well, I don't know that officially, because they don't never tell you officially. But we were riffing on this like some months ago about, I think it was Hong Kong we were talking about.
Oh, right. The freedom of free Hong Kong, like
and like the Overwatch characters and the
right.
So, like I say, I'm pretty sure we're already banned in China, but no, I don't trust the numbers at all. And I mean, like, that's not. I don't think it should be too terribly politically controversial for people who are outside of China and who have studied some history of, well, not China in and of itself, but sort of the style of the countries that have at various times adopted a style of governance similar to China's, right? So whether you want to lump the Soviet Union in with that number, or whether you just want to keep it like, in kind of that Asia Pacific area, a hallmark of sort of that quasi Marx derived form of governance is disinformation. Hell, the Russians gave up the quasi Marxist bit and they're still masters of disinformation. So I'm not at all surprised. I don't think anyone should be surprised that the numbers that have been reported, as bad as they are probably not accurate. For the same reason that I don't trust Russia's numbers right now, I don't trust the fact that Russia has a very surprisingly low virus count. I would be interested to see the stats on the number of pneumonia cases they're treating in their hospitals at the moment.
I mean, I've seen pictures of their president. Do they have a president, or what do they call their chief executive in Russia?
They have a few different guys with a few different titles. I think Putin is a president.
Right. Well, I was speaking about Putin, but I didn't really want to. Well, again, I was trying to stay away from being too political, but I've seen pictures of him walking around in a full hazmat gear.
Right.
Full everything.
I think I prefer that to bare-chested. So, continue.
So seeing that kind of threw the numbers in Russia to me in a suspicious light. What scares me, though, is how rapidly my own country's numbers are ballooning and continuing to do so. And yet everybody is still trying to say we need to stay this open, we need to stay this open. And while I can understand their reasoning, people are dying because of it.
Yeah. I was reading an article actually literally just before I came into the conversation here, and it's a local thing. Maybe I'll try and find it here because it might be worth including. But it was an article from the Edmonton Journal, which is kind of the main newspaper in Edmonton, my hometown. And it was talking about how almost half of businesses in Edmonton expect to permanently close as a result of this lockdown period and how long it is likely to go on. 3%, evidently, 3% have already closed. And that's a staggering number to have literally half of the business community, half of a local economy just gone. And I mean, again, I'm totally on board with the fact that, we're talking about people's lives here. We're talking about stopping the spread of a virus that is, the mortality rate's already a little bit, it's higher than, your typical seasonal flu. We're not talking a MERS level mortality rate here, but it's still there's a certain concern. And especially, when you have an elderly population, there's a heightened level of concern. And I totally get, we want to stop this thing from spreading. We want to keep people alive as much as possible. But someone, who was I reading? I don't remember. This may have been another Facebook group that I'm part of that a friend invited me into. I was having a discussion with someone to the effect of, what is an economy? Fundamentally, an economy is just a framework within which people interact and transact and trade goods and value, trade value and the fruits of their labors, right? Whether goods or currency. But it's basically just a framework in which people interact and transact to provide for the needs and wants of others and to obtain what is necessary for their own needs and wants. That's all an economy is, right? Which is to say that basically economy is people relating to each other in some sort of transactional way. All right. We have these, we have economies because we're not all producers, right? Some of us are producers, some of us are consumers. Some of us produce certain things that others consume and then have to consume things that others produce, right? And the economy is not, some nebulous thing off on its own. The economy is that thing that ties all of this together, right? It's how we as disparate people in, who share a common area in which we live, are able to carry all of that out, carry that interaction out. So you can't ever divorce an economy from the people that comprise it. And this is where I think a lot of people are really struggling right now, because two things are true. One, if you don't have people, because a lot of them have died, then your economy is going to suffer as a result of that. But equally, if a lot of people hunker down and just basically go away for 4 months and half your economy withers on the vine, that in turn is going to pose significant problems when those people are able to begin interacting and transacting with each other again. And that could also cost lives, probably less than COVID-19 will. But, even something simple like, I don't know how messy I want to get in with this, but even something simple like, canceling certain elective surgeries, right? There's a particular elective surgery, well, it's been deemed elective, that my wife has been waiting for a good length of time. And it's kind of one of those things where for some people it would be an elective thing. For her, it's kind of, it's the difference between bleeding out 1 month, and we don't know which month that's going to be, but it's going to happen someday, or not. But hysterectomies are canceled or are categorized as elective.
Unless you have some sort of cancer related. That's kind of why they took moms out.
Right. And that's not her case. And like I say, I don't know how squishy I want to get here, and it's very personal. So let's keep that, whatever. But point is, there's, and like she's just one example. I mean, she works in a hospital, so she knows much more about what surgeries are going ahead and which surgeries are getting canceled. We've heard from friends who their kids have cavities in their teeth that actually need a surgical intervention. But basically, dentists are not taking patients right now. So what should have been routine cavity maintenance now basically is only going to be done either, 4 to 6 months from now, or if it becomes an emergency situation where, the kid is basically just in searing pain and can't eat, can't sleep, blah, 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 because the cavity has worn away so much of the tooth that it's basically eating away at the root.
Well,
There's a lot of, this gets super complex because it's a human system, and human systems are always complex. And, there's good arguments, better arguments, I think, for just hunkering down and weathering it out. But people aren't wrong to be concerned, maybe even very concerned at, looking ahead and saying, okay, but what are we going to come out of hibernation to? Bear goes to sleep in the forest. Bear wakes up on the other side of winter, and half the forest has been cut down for paper. That's going to be hard on Bear.
You're not wrong.
So,
However,
I do, again, I don't necessarily agree with, especially some of the more gung-ho, rah, get her done agitation for just reopening everything and damn the torpedoes that's been coming out of certain quarters of especially the US. But I do understand that there are other concerns. Some of them are heavy concerns. So, it's I don't know. It's
messy.
and you know what's funny? Well, funny might not be the right word, but I did laugh a little bit about this when I heard it on a podcast today, because I'm backlogged on all my podcasts, of course, because I have no time to listen to them anymore. But one of the cybersecurity podcasts I was listening to was talking about how with all of this, I think it was the Beers with Talus podcast, could be wrong, but was talking about how with all of this sudden shift to remote work, oh shoot, and now it just fell out of my head. I'm tired.
Me too.
Where was
It's
I
already
going?
hours past
Yeah,
bedtime.
it's crazy. I really want it back because it's an interesting side point. Maybe it'll come back to me. I don't know. I noticed you hit the channel there. Let's have a look at those while I'm trying to remember what the hell I was going to say.
I hear what you're saying, though, as far as, we need something of the economy to keep going, so we have, so we're not completely in a massive recession when things get out.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, at the same time, we do want people to, be there to re-participate in the economy when this whole thing does go away. It's just, how long is that realistically going to take? And I don't know. I'm banking on 4 months. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 6. I mean, at this point, I think my kids have all gone to bed, so I can say this. I think the school year is a write-off for the remainder of the year here.
Well,
I just really, really hope that schools are able to reopen in September, because it has been probably 8 years since I've seen my eldest kid be as excited and happy and just, I mean, there's a lot of things she likes to do. There's a lot of things she loves. But there was just something about like when she came back from the open house and then the next day when we just kind of went and checked out this junior high during the day, like she had positively just delight just radiating from her. And I haven't seen that too often in her. She's like me. She's not easy to betray like she doesn't easily betray happiness. So when she does, like we sit up and take note and just how stoked she was to go to junior high and at this particular school. So I really hope she gets to do that in September because man, that is gonna, like I can put up with a lot. I can put up with a lot of seeing heartbreak in my kids at, oh, I can't go for play dates for the next 4 months, or oh, we can't do this, or oh, we can't do that, or oh, they had to postpone the jamboree, or whatever the case may be. But that'll break my heart.
I know this won't help much, but one thing I will always say, on a personal level, I've always respected your intelligence. Worst case scenario, you can always do what you can to try to at least get your kids some personal education.
Oh, we've been doing that already. I mean,
Oh yeah.
it's
figured
been
you had.
yeah, well, I mean, like, okay, so we're lucky in that our school system, like, really, they stepped up and they, we were caught, I don't know if I discussed this here. I discussed it on the scouting podcast. We were caught fairly flat footed by the announcement that schools were going to be closed because the message on Friday was that they weren't going to be. But then by Sunday, they were. So
I think
literally,
there
it
was
was
a
a
lot of
case.
school systems, even in the US, where it's like, well, we're going to wait a little bit, see how it is. And then suddenly it's like, nope, quick, 180.
Yeah, but this was literally a case of like, okay, well, and actually the Friday had been a day off. The Friday had been a PD day. So like it was literally, they wrapped up Thursday afternoon and it was like, okay, well, see you Monday. And then by Sunday, it was like Monday ain't happening. Uh, very, very quickly. Just went from one approach to the other, just like that.
Meanwhile,
And yeah, well, and I mean, okay, fine. Like I get why, they Alberta was taking a somewhat cautious approach, but the minute they had the first probable case of community spread, they said, nope, closed. So, okay, fine, whatever.
whether the U.S. were that cautious, to be fair.
Hmm. But, so eldest, it actually didn't really impact her that much. She gets most of her lessons delivered and she submits most of her lessons electronically anyways, like Google Classroom all the way. The grade 1 and the grade 3 were caught a little bit more flat-footed, so their teachers sent out some reading assignments for the week. Basically, eldest just kept on doing her thing, pretty much as normal. But then it was spring break. Then we had the week break, and that was good. We kind of just let the kids get into this cadence of going for walks and playing in the backyard and getting used to saying hi to people from a ways away. And then, so this week was their first week back at school, quote unquote, which basically means that I literally like scrounged around and press ganged a bunch of laptops into service. And, now the grade 3, the grade 1, they're all set up on Google Classroom. They're using Epic Books or Raz Kids for reading. They are using, the youngest is using Seesaw for a lot of her assignments. It's not, a lot of these technologies for delivering remote learning already existed. And I mean, like, we still let them play like Prodigy MMO. We have supplemental materials. My wife ordered at least here in Canada, you can actually get like you can basically get like books of the like entire grade curriculum for different subject matter, like math or English or whatever. Um, we're a Catholic school system, so the religion teacher basically just said, you know what, here is the religion curriculum book. We're going to work through as much of it as we can. And but she like gave the curriculum book like right to us parents, just like that. Normally we don't get to see all of those materials, so it's kind of neat to actually get a little look behind the curtain. But I mean, they, it was like they kind of improvised for that first week. Then the teachers worked like frantically all through spring break. And now we're into this week where, they unlocked Google Hangouts. Normally they block it on their Google Classroom instance or their Google Classroom domain. They normally block Hangouts. They unlocked it so the students can correspond with each other. They're having basically daily hangout chats with different friends. A lot of people that they know through the community or through Scouts have been getting onto Facebook Messenger Kids, which is kind of neat and is not too creepy about the amount of information it expects.
I didn't know there was such a thing as Facebook Messenger Kids, because I
Messenger-
thought
Messenger Kids, so the way Messenger Kids works is like basically it's tied to my Facebook profile, but then I can spin up kids under my profile that only exist kind of within this Messenger Kids ecosystem. It's a standalone app, and the kids kind of have their own pseudo profile. But the thing is, like, it doesn't really care how much information I do and don't give it. Everything is skippable. My kids, their real names aren't even on there.
I
Yeah.
had to ask because I've heard so many horror stories of friends who, well, much younger friends than myself, mind you, who, when they were much younger, lied about their age on Facebook and got into things they really didn't need to be in.
No, and that's the thing. Like, it doesn't actually create them like a Facebook profile. They're kind of just like a little highlight of my profile. But the point is, anybody that I'm connected with who also has kids defined under their profile, then our kids can become contacts on Messenger. But of course, it all happens through the parents, and there's approvals that it's for a Facebook product, it's surprisingly consent and privacy conscious system. I'm genuinely surprised.
Oh yeah, given that I have to use my my legal name, which I don't like using in public on Facebook, because somebody reported my old Facebook name for not being my real name. So I had to provide proof of what my actual real name was. And I am so glad to hear about that, because that's one thing I have noticed. I'm a shut-in. I live with I live with my mother, who's also a shut-in. So right now our lives haven't been impacted much, other than we go out even less than we usually do. But I've noticed so many people struggling to cope who are so used to direct personal social interaction and aren't getting it, that I deeply feel for people, struggling to cope with that, not just feeling lost. It's so sad to see.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like, it's even like we did a Zoom meeting with eldest scout troop last night, and we didn't have a lot of the kids show up. And unfortunately, like, my neighbor, he was telling me this, and then a couple of the other scouters were telling me this, correspondence they've had with parents of some of the scouts, is that, I mean, like, I already worked from home, and my wife's schedule was such that, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, like, we've set our lives up in a particular way so that both of us are still working, but one of us is always home with the kids.
Yeah, and that's tough to do already as it is.
And I mean, I can list you off some of the sacrifices that have been made as a result of that. It has had some costs that attend it, but you know what? Like, this was a choice we made, and we made our lives fit that. There's a lot of families in our area who, through choices that they have made, that's not a workable option for them, right? We live much more, we live fairly frugally. We have an older house, we have older vehicles, don't have a boat, don't have a lake lot, don't have this, don't have that. It's, it's a problem because, like, I mean, a lot of the people around here, a lot of the husbands they work in the patch, right? Except they've all been furloughed now. And, like, the school called us in during that first week the school sent out they basically sent out an email to parents saying, okay, one of you come pick up your kids' things. So my wife went, and she was saying that, there are literally people like milling around outside the school waiting for their turn to go in. And she could hear them like on the phone with, their bank or their mortgage broker, basically trying to get deferrals and things lined up. And like, we've been very lucky that we've kind of skated by all of that. My job hasn't been impacted by this. My wife's a nurse. Her job is not going to be impacted by this,
I'm
except
glad
in particularly interesting ways, I suppose.
I'm glad to hear that. I have a friend who lives in Nolens who was laid off from his job. He works maintenance at a hotel,
Yep.
and
And
his landlord is still requiring that he pay rent. And he had enough to pay this month's rent and signed it and commented on the paper check that he gave his landlord, "You monster."
yeah, well, what can you do? I don't know if they have completely, I think landlords are still here allowed to charge rent, but no evictions can be done for non-payment for the next 6 months at least. And anyways, it was just great to get on Zoom with the other scouts, because the ones that did show up, you could kind of tell like they were cabin fevering it. It was bad.
Yeah, one of my friends is in the local area is a teacher. I've known her since, oh good lord, 2001 already.
Yep.
And some of their fellow teachers are just, they have that cabin fever now into the ridiculous level. And with their inability to use technology, which surprises me for a bunch of them all being like 20-year-olds and being teachers. It's a little surprising. Like they're all using, every single one of them's all using the Google Classroom. Every single student's got their own little account at the domain and everything.
Google Classroom is bloody cool. Like just how it works and how well integrated it all is. Like totally understand why Google is dominating in it.
So many school districts, public and private.
Yep.
Private schools.
My
too.
kids get to
Jumping
use
on it.
Hangouts Meet. Do you
Yeah.
know how jealous I am?
Like my two teacher friends of mine have literally joined my personal Discord server in there, learning to use Discord for school stuff with other teachers and things like that. It's just like, oh, people are learning. Like in some ways, this whole thing, like they're learning to, record videos, post videos, so the kids
Yep.
that don't want to do the live stuff can do the little more passive stuff, and it's just
For sure.
it's amazing.
But that was the thing. I don't know if I said this specifically because of course I went off on a tangent as I'm wont to do, but like one of the bits of feedback, like we did have a lot of scouts on the Zoom meeting last night, and I mean obviously a lot of families around here are kind of, the feedback we've been getting, the feedback I've heard from my neighbor and from some of the other scouters talking to different sets of parents is that, maybe we, the scouters, are gung ho to put these solutions out there that allow our youth to connect remotely and carry on with modified scouting related activities at home. Maybe teachers are just gung ho to deploy all of this technology and distance learning and, connect with their students and just do everything they can to keep them learning. But there's so many families around here who are just to all of this saying, whoa, hold up. Like we're still trying to figure out if we have income and, like we can't, sorry, but we just can't be thinking about this other stuff right now,
Oh yeah. And then there's families where like there's a case of one where they don't even have internet at home because the
Yep.
kids are actually being raised by the grandma and not the single parent.
Yep.
And
Or
it's
like,
just like oof, there's
I was,
just so many variations and like so like having to put together packets of stuff. Like I actually had to remind some of them, it's like, hey, look at it, a lot of the copy machines we have now can scan stuff to PDF. Like make PDFs, post them online, but then for those where they do want the hard copies and you're not wasting paper, you have all these other options. It's like you got to start picking up on this stuff. That, good grief, back when we were all in college, I was saying, hey, why aren't we doing some of this stuff in our schools? I was
yep.
called a lunatic, and it's like,
Yeah. Who's laughing now? Me, because I was laughing anyways. Mwah.
oh yeah, it's exactly. And I'm just kind of loving the fact where it's like we could kind of see a need for this coming, but like we didn't realize it would come this quickly or this.
Oh, that was the point that I was trying to make. They were talking about disaster response, right? They were
Oh
talking about disaster
yeah,
response plans. They're just like, okay, so just hands up around the table. how many of your clients in their disaster response plans have raging virus that sends our entire workforce home, and now we have to figure out how to let them all VPN in? Anybody? Like we think of disaster response in the IT realm as being, well, like, oh, we get hit with ransomware, or all of our computers crash, or
All the
one of
customers I deal with are all
Yeah.
food manufacturers.
Yeah,
Like, they
our
can't
server
do that.
colo, our server colo catches fire and is a smoking crater in the ground now. Like, this is the normal IT disaster recovery mentality. And it's not that those are not good things to plan for, but I wonder how many companies in their DR plan had, crazy virus. Everybody's working from home now. Can we even get everybody logged in to do their normal business things? And yeah, hey, you know what? Actually, and even my employer, they've sent out a little notification saying, "Hey, by the way, guys, only use the VPN when you really need to." This the email was like, "The following services do not require a VPN to access." So it's like, if all you need to do is use these services, and it's stuff like Mail or Microsoft Teams or a lot of the day-to-day stuff. Um, you don't need the VPN to access that, right? I need the VPN to like access certain file stores or to access certain internal websites or things like that. Um, if I want to submit my timesheets or something. But outside of that, I don't need the VPN for much. So I try and stay off of it because, even though I work for a pretty large company, there's a pretty high tech company. Um, Even a very large company, a very high tech company like that is not necessarily ready to suddenly have 30 to 40,000 workers who normally are in the office go remote and start hitting its VPNs globally, right? That's not something we could easily absorb. And I imagine that for smaller companies, that's out of the question entirely. But yeah, that was the thing. My buddy was saying too, he was telling me that his neighbor sold like an old iPad, like an iPad 2, right? So this thing doesn't even get updates anymore. It's like stuck at iOS 11 or whatever. Now, granted, a lot of apps will still work on iOS 11, but yeah, I know he was telling me that his neighbor had like an old iPad 2, sold it on Kijiji which is like an internet garage sale if you're not familiar with it, for like $200. Took about 3 minutes. Because again, like, I mean, I'm lucky. I scrounge my IT department all the time, so I had a bunch of laptops that I was kind of able to kit bash together and press gang a few into service because some of them still had good screens, and then I could grab RAM from over here and a hard drive from over here. Um, so I was able to kit bash together some laptops. So all the kids, well, I mean, eldest had her Chromebook anyways. Then other two have laptops now. I had the hardware. I could get it spun up and running in a couple of days. It was not a big deal. But again, a lot of families not in that position, and they're just scrambling even for basic hardware. I just loaned my dad one of my old webcams that I don't use it anymore. But silly man, he decided that maybe okay for his office team, Google Hangouts, Meets, whatever, he wanted to have a webcam. So he foolishly went to London Drugs looking for one. And I mean, they're sold out for months, right? He'd sooner find like sanitizing wipes, I'm sure.
There is one point that I wanted to make about the IT that I was trying to. I kept thinking I was interrupting people, but it's just that I was muted.
Go on.
One thing you never hear about disaster preparedness people talking about is, the worst of worst case scenarios, a city, in a major hub and router network just simply not being part of the network anymore due to, say, being a crater. Because if I remember correctly, the original ARPANET was designed as a way to have redundancy for connections between servers in case the worst happened.
Yeah, and I mean, like, granted, the specter of nuclear war has faded somewhat, which is good. But yeah, I mean, and that's kind of what I mean is that, but and that is actually that kind of dovetails nicely with what I was just saying, right? Is like when we think about disaster recovery in an IT context, we're talking about, quote, nowadays the hot buzzword is business continuity, right? How do we, even if we do lose this chunk of the network, even if we do lose this facility, even if we do lose this many computer assets, how does the business continue operating? Can the business continue operating? And all of modern ITDR efforts tend to be focused on that. So whether that's keeping good backups so you can restore if you get hit with ransomware, whether that's having, you know, multiple co-located server farms to distribute server load, but then also, you know, if you lose this bank of servers over here, well, then these ones over here can just pick up the slack and keep going. You know, I know I've cited the Maersk example before, you know, where the only reason that they were able to come back from getting hit with NotPetya, pretty sure it was NotPetya, was because they happened to have one domain controller off that day. And it was in Africa somewhere. And they actually had to like almost smuggle it out of the country and get it back to England or wherever to begin recovery operations. But
Well,
know,
I think
like-
a lot of businesses also just simply don't take something like this current situation in mind, regardless of industry. I mean, the last
Well, and
time
that's
we've
it,
had
yeah.
anything that felt like this would be the past, like, what, 3 that we've had? I think there's, what, the 2009 one, but that was, what, like,
well, H1N1,
Three-
yeah, 2009, but that wasn't
that was
this.
pittance. And then there was, what was it, the 57, I think, was the next one.
Well, there was SARS in
there's
2003 in parts of the world.
Yeah, but it was never really like a full-on, like, the true label of a pandemic, though. Like, there
No,
was
you'd
one
have
in
to
the
go back
late
to the 50s.
I think there was
Or
an
to the
H1 in
Spanish flu.
68,
Yeah,
possibly.
well, the 50s especially, and then 1918, of course.
Oh yeah, and the 1918, which was, what was it, like 50 million?
It was bad. It was bad
I mean, 50 million across the world is rather ridiculous.
for 1918, yes. There were a lot less
And
of
even
us then.
still, they haven't even figured out some of the reasons behind why it was so deadly. And it's like, with modern medicine, they haven't even been able to figure some of this stuff all
Well,
these
because
later.
that one was unusual in its own way, because so like the current
Well, it's more than
virus
a
is
century now
unusual.
at this point, even.
Yeah. Well, the current virus, like the coronavirus, is unusual in a way because it disproportionately affects the aged, but it has almost no effect on the very young, right?
Yeah.
You know, that's not to say kids can't get sick with it, but the mortality rate for the under 10 set is still basically 0.
No, it's been affecting men more than women too, which has been
Well,
fascinating. But
And
I think
people
that's
with-
not
more
as
common sense.
unusual, though. That's
I think
not as
that's more-
unusual.
Yeah, I think that's more just common sense reasoning with that than
Well, I
what
mean,
most
it's
people
not
think.
it's not unusual for a disease to affect men or women more. That happens a lot. It happens on, you know, that happens a lot, and it breaks both ways depending on what we're talking about. So that's not unusual. But
Yeah.
Umbre was pointing out a couple months ago that it's very unusual that, because like normally when the flu is doing its thing, the very young and the very old are most at risk. Coronavirus is a little bit different. The very old are still at risk, but the very young seem not to be, pretty much at all. And the Spanish flu was weird again, because the Spanish flu, in addition to being of significant risk to the very young and the very old, was also particularly deadly for like that. I think it was like, you know, kind of that 25 to 35 demographic. So kind of that, you know, sort of young to mid adulthood. It was also so, you know, we talk about, Umbre was talking about the lack of a U curve, right? You know, when you're looking at like the relative mortality rates across different age categories. With the Spanish flu, as I recall, it was more of a W, because it was like really deadly if you were very young. And then it was kind of, you know, okay to older childhood, teenage years, and then just into like adulthood, it got deadly again. And then it was kind of okay for like, you know, sort of older adults. And then if you're really old, it was deadly again. So it's like,
A lot of that could also potentially be explained by the environment those people are in. I mean, let's face it, young adults are going to be working. In the 1920s, they would have been doing a lot of hard manual labor. I mean,
yeah,
how many
they'll be in the
labor
line of
strikes did
fire.
we have at the time?
Yeah, well, yeah. So
And also, naturally, the very young and the very old have compromised immune systems, either due to not having built up their immune system or due to being
various
old.
other comorbidities, as
Right.
the parlance goes. Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, I don't know, like the Spanish flu was weird. The thing in the 50s, I think that was a little bit more conventional. It just got out of hand. Well, and that's the thing too, like that was kind of more the problem with H1N1 too, right? Was that we have a battery of flu vaccines or we have a flu vaccine, which, like, as I understand it, they kind of try and be a little bit anticipatory as to which flu strains are going to be the dominant ones in any given year. And then they develop a vaccine cocktail around like the top 3 or 4, which is great unless they miss their guess, right?
Right.
And that's what happened with H1N1, as I understand it. Was that, because I had gotten a flu shot that year, but there I was lining up to get my H1N1 flu shot because, whoopsie, we kind of made a bad call and that one got out of hand.
Yeah.
And I mean, you've put it into light, however, or how, the economy is going to be screwed if we hunker down too hard. You're right. However, we've got people going the other way saying, go ahead and sacrifice your grandparents. We need to keep the economy going, go to work, forget this lockdown stuff.
Well, I mean, there are some countries that are, like Taiwan has been managing this without full lockdown. Now, Taiwan also was more directly in the path of SARS. See, there I go getting the podcast banned again. I'm calling it Taiwan. But anyways, Taiwan has been managing the coronavirus relatively well without going the total. I believe their schools are still open. So they have not gone the total lockdown route. They're taking a modified approach that aggressively tests and does seek to, basically looks at the particularly vulnerable populations, isolates them, and then aggressively tests at any point where there's interactions between the general population and those isolated groups. And then within the general population, of course, if symptoms develop, if someone else develops symptoms, then they're required to isolate and they aggressively test around where that person, where the symptomatic person was. So they're doing sort of this combination of like community tracing with aggressive testing, targeted aggressive testing with selective isolation of vulnerable populations, and then people who are not in vulnerable populations who manifest symptoms. It's a juggling act, to be sure, but they seem to be doing very well with it. But equally, Taiwan, and I mean, I think this is largely true of a lot of Asian cultures, is that there's sort of a different cultural attitude towards compliance with policies and edicts, which you don't tend to find, sorry to say, in America.
Well, let's be honest. If it wasn't for the fact that a certain pastor in Tampa said, I don't care what the people say, or what the government says, I'm an American and I'm going to hold church whether they like it or not, we wouldn't have had him arrested due to so many of his parishioners getting COVID-19.
Oh, was that the guy who claimed he spent like $100,000 on machines that supposedly could kill any virus or bacteria?
And claiming
That might have
his
been a different
arrest,
guy.
right? And claiming his arrest violates freedom of religion.
Like my pastors have handled this so wonderfully. Like we have the live streams. We get hundreds of people just every Sunday, and even with the Lent services, we get quite a decent amount of people. They have a few people that are the only ones. It's like 10 people at the most at church, so we can hear other people singing while we take part at home. Like it's actually kind of nice.
Right. I mean, I understand the need for faith right now, despite not being a religious person myself. I understand the need for the comforts of faith. I absolutely do. But when even the Pope is saying stay home and people are still going to church anyway, and getting themselves and their family sick because they feel they have to go to church, that's a problem.
Yeah, well, and I mean, like fortunately within at least the Catholic tradition, we do have the option of participating, quote, remotely, unquote, right? Like we've watched Mass via YouTube the last couple of days, and technically that satisfies the requirement in these situations where we're not able to access a parish directly. As long as I can take the Eucharist at least once within the next calendar year, I'm okay.
Yeah.
But equally, and I know I discussed this in the UDIC Discord too, as a person of some faith who does try and take it seriously and communicate that seriousness to his kids as well, like this hurts.
And I so understand and appreciate that. I grew, you've heard me talk of faith. I grew up Southern Baptist. You are literally preaching to the choir boy. I understand the pain of not being able to participate in something that has become so much part of your life. I mean,
Yep.
I really do.
Like it's I think the point that I was making is like, it's weird to me to be in a situation where to preserve my life and the lives of others, I have to accept for a time being apart from the one thing above all other things that I should love more than life itself. It bakes my brain to think about. And I mean, like, I definitely am in compliance with my bishop, trusting that the bishop and the hierarchy of the church above him know what they are urging is the right path, you know. But it hurts in just the most fundamental, deep-seated way to not be able to take part in this. I can be fine doing scouting remotely. I can be fine being away from my family for a couple of weeks on end and being, the remote parent because I have a work trip. But even just like missing one mass and having to take part in it in this unusual and different way, that was a lot. And I was not ready to be hit by it in the way that I was.
Yeah, for me, it hasn't hit me as hard as it has with you, because with all my health problems at times, it literally has been the only option some weeks, sometimes even some months.
Yeah.
So for me, I've just kind of gotten used to it, as sometimes this literally can be the only option, because I'm not going to, cause myself to easily get sick to the point where I have to be hospitalized again, or
Oh, sure.
sometimes, go and be completely miserable because I have caught something that I shouldn't have, because I either failed to follow through, or it was simply unavoidable, because despite all the extra steps I take always.
No, for sure.
Good grief, I already offended my boss, because every time he hands me paperwork at work, it's like, nope, wiping it all down. Don't care, not touching it with my hands until after I do that.
It did just occur to me, though, that this might be a really great opportunity for me to find alternative. Oh, my baptismal parish does a YouTube live stream. Oh,
Yeah,
well,
it's amazing how much more and more people are embracing interesting tech things.
Well,
It's
and
kinda
especially
cool.
because, like, you gotta understand, right? So, like, my baptismal parish is a Ukrainian Greek Orthodox, Ukrainian Greek
Yep.
Catholic parish, right?
Mhm.
So, like, I'm an Eastern Rite. I'm Eastern Rite by birth, and largely by rearing as well. We kind of flipped between two parishes, one Western, one Eastern. But my baptismal parish, the parish I was baptized in, now has a YouTube live stream that they do. I
Mine does
may
too, my old
need
baptismal one from back in the day.
I may need to. Oh, yeah, there's their Palm Sunday Divine Liturgy scheduled this coming weekend. I might need to, I don't know, set about introducing my children to some of the other rites of the Catholic Church.
No, it's fun. Having experienced both the Eastern and Western myself, it's quite fascinating.
Well, I could maybe find like some cereal Malabar and
Would
13 official rites.
would this be offensive if I said you're all are speaking ancient Greek to me?
Oh.
Well, actually, what is I'm not even sure if the Melikites speak Greek. I don't even know what they would speak.
Dang.
Uh,
I grew up in a rather fundamentalist Southern Baptist church, so Greek was almost a dirty word because part of the dogma was that anything other than the King James, anything, especially where they mentioned the original Greek, was a dogma by the Catholic Church to put Satan into the Bible. No,
yeah, I know. I've read the Jack Chick tract.
Yeah, the church I grew up in took Jack Chick for 100% truth,
Oh, yeah. I've met many of the sort over the years, I'm sure.
and
Go on.
and I'm not trying to turn this into a talk about religion. I mean, I appreciate, it makes me so happy to hear people talk with such fervency about what is important to them, even if it's not something that's important to me.
Yeah, well, and I mean, like, okay, granted, we've been talking about church for the last 10 minutes, so guess what? We're already on the religion topic. But, yeah, no, I mean, like, it's,
I appreciate the people, seeking to enrich themselves, seeking to better themselves. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I think it's an important thing, the search for truth, for knowledge.
yeah, and I mean, like, someone was making this point. It might have been Bishop Barron, I'm not sure, but like, this is an opportunity right now, and this kind of gets back to sort of your earlier comment about like just continuing my kids' education at home. Now, granted, again, school board, they have been on top of it, so they've provided us with lots of resources. But me and my wife were going to do it anyways, and we had been lining up resources anyways, and we already had resources on hand anyways.
And it makes me glad to hear that you have that available, because here in the U.S., most of your homeschool systems are usually through religious-based groups. So,
Well, that's true here too, but you know what? So whatever. So what, right? I mean, now to be fair, almost every homeschool organization I know about it does have a religious angle to it. They're still all, like they're still required to teach the core components of the Alberta curriculum, and then they can put their own stuff on top of that. But
we don't really have core other than Common Core here, and even there, most of your various groups say, "Oh, well, that's quote unquote this or that or the other group trying to brainwash your children and try to vote it down and make it go away."
I know, I've seen all of that. Whatever. I mean, here, not that there isn't controversy over this or that thing in the curriculum here at times, but like in general, the education is standardized province by province. So, Saskatchewan will have its education board, and then any school that operates within Saskatchewan, broadly speaking, needs to teach the core curriculum as defined by the province, and then they can add their own components on top of that, right? So if you have a Jewish school, they still need to teach the math, the social studies, the English, the science components out of the Alberta curriculum, but then they can layer on whatever cultural aspects in addition to that they want to. So anyways, point is, our school board was well prepared, but even if they hadn't been, like, we had materials on hand and we ordered some other materials in, we'd have been fine to just kind of carry on. And, like, even we went and saw my parents kind of like one last time before we hunkered down, and I cleaned out one of the bookshelves there. So I grabbed a bunch of books about space and history and just stuff, right? And sure, the space book still lists Pluto as a planet, but the only reason I grabbed that one actually was because like my daughter and I had been talking about Venus on the way over to the house to see my folks. And I'm just like, actually, hang on, there's a book here that has like a couple of photos from the surface of Venus. So I found it, and we just took it home, right? And it talks about all kinds, even if it does call Pluto a planet, because it's older, it still talks about a lot of other stuff beyond just the solar system. It talks about black holes. It talks about redshifting and blue shifting and all of just these cool concepts, right? And she's just been cracking into it every chance she gets. So it's great to see, right?
On the topic of Pluto, do the new books and literature actually say what Pluto is?
It's a minor planet. That's the official term for it now. Lame and awesome, but whatever.
Well, speaking
we
of
all
lame,
know it's a mass relay.
Speaking of lame, I got to be up in a little less than 4 hours. So
holy
I'm
crap! It's
going
11:15. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go too.
Go to bed.
I remember when they were originally calling it a dwarf planet, or is that just another term for a minor planet?
Yeah, I think. Well, I imagine dwarf is probably an offensive term somewhere now. So minor seems better.
All right, I will catch you guys next time.
Yeah,
you
for sure.
sleep well, Golem. It's good to talk to you.
Yeah.
I know.
Good night. I'm going to wrap it up here as well. I just wanted to kind of try and finish the one point there, which was that, so even if, Yeah, even if we'd had to carry on educating the kids, we would have. But it's like that Facebook meme that my wife shared a little while ago. And suddenly nobody asked stay-at-home moms what they did all day. It's yeah, I mean, just everybody's trying to figure this one out, and some people are doing it, I think, maybe better than others. We've made choices. In some respects, they have set us back or not allowed us to, have all of the nice things that other families have. But on the other hand, I think we're doing well by our kids as a result. And I suppose that's what matters. But I mean, the point that was being made kind of around this by, I think, Bishop Barron was that, you know what? Like, this is an opportunity. You're going to have to find ways to teach your kids at home anyways. So why not, in addition to the school stuff, which they should continue to learn, why not take this opportunity to really kind of just deep dive into those unique aspects of culture that are particular to you and your family, So why don't I, see if this week I can find like a Melechite mass or a Syrio Malabar mass, and we'll watch that on TV instead of the usual Roman Rite one. Why don't we find opportunities to take in other aspects of this one church we're all part of as a family to see how they do it elsewhere in the world? Because it isn't always the same thing, depending on where you go in the world. And it's kind of interesting to have that other perspective, because some of that, some of those other rites date back 1700 years or more, and so to be able to drink that in and kind of understand that not only is this a thing that a lot of people around the world we all do in common with, but some of the ways that people are still doing it are some of the ways that people were doing it, back before they'd finished arguing what the Bible even was going to be comprised of.
And people still argue that when we talk about, say, matters of Deuterocanon or the Apocrypha.
Sure, but the point is, like, we didn't even have, we didn't have any sense, so I'm pretty sure the Christendom liturgy dates, well, I don't know about the Christendom liturgy, but like some of them, especially as you get even further east than like the Ukraine, you're talking about services that, broadly speaking, have not changed format since before there was any canon to speak of.
Now, to
So,
me, this is very, very interesting because, again, I grew up in a fundy Protestant church. We were basically, what the education we were given about Catholicism was that it was very much a large, monolithic, organization that was very heavily orthodox and didn't tolerate much deviation from what the Vatican said as Holy Writ.
well, yes and no, right? I mean, if you're going to deny the real presence, guess what? You're off the team. But how a particular subgroup within the umbrella of Catholicism goes about confecting the Eucharist and celebrating it, there's room for variety there. It's not unusual too, even like, broadly speaking, even within, say, the Roman Rite, the common Western Rite, it's not unusual to see all sorts of appropriations or accommodations to local culture, right?
Well, that's one thing I've personally noticed. Quite a lot of matters of friends who've been Catholic mentioning certain saints or that, and I'm like, that's very syncretic because I remember hearing about those as deities in the local mythology.
Yeah, and I mean, like, sometimes it can go a little too far, but equally, like, that is something that historically Catholicism has been very good at doing, is just kind of meeting a culture where it's at. But I mean, like, you see this in Paul, right? Like, you see this in Paul's writings. Paul doesn't walk into, Paul doesn't walk into the middle of Athens and say, "You're all wrong and a bunch of idiots, and here is the one true God." He
Is this the
meets
story
them
about the
where,
statue of the unknown god?
right. He meets them. And I mean, granted, it doesn't go as well for him. He doesn't quite make his case as well as he should, maybe. But the point is, he doesn't walk in and just be like, "No, you're all wrong, and this is what's true." he walks in and he tries to, the term is accommodation, right? He tries to retain all of the things for them that are true and just tries to sort of redirect away from what is in error. And this is something that the church does again and again and again. It adapts to local cultures all the time, and it tries to preserve as much as it can that is, still in alignment with the broad truths as articulated in, say, like the Nicene Creed or something like that, right? And you'll notice, like, the Nicene Creed is really broad. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. That means that, a young earth creationist can be Catholic and an evolutionary creationist like me can be Catholic. And we can disagree about the means of creation, but we can both still be validly Catholic, because all we have to assent to is that God is the creator of all things visible and invisible.
Oh, and again, as somebody who grew up in a fundamentalist denomination, I see that as very appealing because, well, we were basically told, you're free to interpret things the way, for yourself, but if your interpretation is different than ours, then it's not going to be good for you.
Yeah. I mean, again, like it really, there are certain things that are dogmatic. There are certain things that, if you're on the team, you accept this. But around that, there's a great deal of room for a variety of perspectives and opinions. It's kind of one of the, Chesterton might call it a paradox, I suppose, of Catholicism. But it's why I think that, I continue to thrive in it. I mean, I've argued with so many people from so many different Christian traditions, and I'm never won over, because it's like, your way of thinking is so small, like it's so limiting.
And I will say this. Yeah, now I'm mostly pagan because, well, their concepts and beliefs kind of fit, my own personal moral code rather closely. However, I will say, with what you're telling me about Catholicism, if that's what I would have learned about Catholicism when I was younger, we didn't have a Catholic church in my small town. The closest one would have been about 30 miles away across the border in Arkansas.
Sure thing.
If I would have had access to Catholicism when I was young, I might still be going to church.
Yeah, it's never too late. Haha. But no, I take your point, right? And like that's I remember doing a bunch of like theology courses and stuff through university, and just the such a common story, to and I mean, like, not that there aren't examples of it within my church too, right? Like, it's there's plenty of people on this side of the fence that get trapped into that same kind of thinking, and bring their children up, and then their children, whoa, hey, they walked away. Why did they do that? Well, geez, I don't know. I'll give you 3 guesses, and the first 2 don't count. But like, it done poorly, these things done poorly, anything. Well, this is true of anything, I suppose. Done poorly, anything is just going to be an excruciating thing that people just want to run from. Done well can be a very different experience. It's the doing it well that's hard, as we are. Oh my gosh, like, especially today was just like a complete crapshoot of, and again, like, all discussion foregoing about how we're doing better than a lot of the other families we know of who are trying to figure out this whole working from home, schooling from home, blah, blah, blah. Just today was just one IT issue after another, trying to make sure that computers were working, and one of them got dropped on the floor, so the battery got slightly jostled. So if the power, it was just, oh my gosh. And then, like, my wife struggling to use a particular web app to help my daughter submit an assignment, because it's, I mean, Seesaw is a pretty good web app and I can use it fairly well, but my wife doesn't quite have my patience with computers a lot of the time. And so she's trying to work within the limits of, like, oh, I need to draw a text box on this, on this form, and then write text in it. But she's like trying to start by drawing the text box, not realizing that the initial size of the text box defines the font size for the text box thereafter. So she's like defining the text box, scaling it to fit the size of the form on this page that our daughter's supposed to submit. And what do you know? The text is monstrously huge. And then I come in and I'm just like, okay, just keep the text box small, start typing a little bit, now resize it. Font size is locked in. But just, like little things like that, right? But it was that all day. Or trying to get a Zoom meeting working or a Hangout working or helping my dad get his stuff working. Just blah. And then in the midst of it, I had to take my son for an appointment because they haven't canceled his surgical date yet. So.
I didn't know you had a son. I just thought you had the 3 girls.
No, my boy, he was born almost 3 years ago now.
Oh.
But unfortunately, he's got very, very deep pits in his teeth. And there's just no way to get at them with a toothbrush. So he's got a few cavities that they need to go in and fix.
I understand why suddenly you were mentioning dental issues earlier.
Yes. Now, his are not as severe as some that I've heard of, but I have heard of some where it's like, and they haven't canceled his, but they've canceled some other ones. And it's like, really? They canceled yours? Because like, you need to get that dealt with like now. I don't know. Maybe it's because he's 2, and these are teeth that he's supposed to hold on to till he's 12. It's less severe, I guess, if a 10-year-old loses their teeth that they're supposed to hold on to till they're 12. It's pretty bad for a 2-year-old. Maybe that's why. At any rate, that's a weird topic to end on, but I'm going to end it there anyways because I got to get to bed.
Night.
Well,
all right.
You have a very good night. It was nice talking to everybody.
Yeah, for sure. Take care, y'all.
You too.
If you want to join the Ultima Dragons, you can do so at udic.org, where you can choose your very own dragon name. You can also find the Ultima Dragons on Facebook. We have a Facebook group there. And you can follow at Ultima Dragons on Twitter or join them on Discord. And if you're feeling really old school, you can even fire up a Telnet client and check out the Weremount. Hit up the show notes for links to all of these. If you want to participate more directly in the podcast, you can send us an email. Or if you're feeling a little bit braver, leave us a voice message in one of 3 places: the podcast website, our Facebook page, or on anchor.fm. And you're also welcome to join us on our Discord server to chat with us, to lurk, or even contribute to podcast recordings when they happen. And again, links in the show notes. If you'd like to support Spam Humbug, you can do so at patreon.com/ultimacodex, where for as little as $1 a month, you can get access to episodes the day before they go live to the general public. You'll also get access to behind-the-scenes audio when we have some to share, and possibly other interesting content. But we also welcome your moral support. You can like the Ultima series on Facebook, follow at Ultima Codex on Twitter, or leave the podcast a review on iTunes. And you're also welcome to share our episodes with your friends and social media circles. Spam Humbug is a production of the Ultima Codex. You can find show notes online at spamhumbug.com. Thank you for listening, and until next time, be virtuous.